20 years ago, I was kidnapped from my friend's front yard by a man that was a total stranger, and I found out later, a serial killer. There are trigger warnings in this story. You have SA, you have kidnapping. So if at any point you're feeling triggered or you're feeling anxious, then please take a moment to take care of yourself and come back when and if it feels appropriate to you. Let me start by telling you who I was 20 years ago. So I was an only child. I grew up riding dirt bikes and horses and go-karts, and I was a little bit of a tomboy. But at 15, I had a boyfriend, and so I had kind of moved away from those things. My best friend had a license. She had a car. We were always together, and she lived close to and was good friends with my boyfriend. So we were just always together. I spent my days hanging out with them. We went to my boyfriend's baseball games. I was a pretty average 15-year-old living in a pretty average community and did not know anyone who had been a victim of a serious crime. I had spent the night with a friend, and I slept in. I woke up. I called my boyfriend, kind of checked in with him. What are you doing today? You're working? Okay, let's meet up later, maybe. My friend and I called another friend who lived at the lake, and she invited us over. And I mean, a day in the sun by the water. Are you kidding? Of course we're there. What else are we doing? We're 15 and 16 years old. So we called my friend's mom, and she asked if there was anything that we needed to do before we left the house. And her mom asked if we could just water the plants. So my friend wanted to take a shower. I volunteered to do that because let's get to the lake, girl. Like, let's get this done. And that was the beginning of a different phase of my life and a decision that probably saved my friend's life and definitely changed my life. I went outside. I was still in my pajamas. I had slept in a pair of cheerleading shorts and a t-shirt from my mom's work. And I was outside watering the plants. I had no shoes on, and I was 15. I was getting ready to get my license. I had driven my mom's boyfriend's car, and it was a Pontiac Trans Am, and I loved the car. My boyfriend's mom also had the same car, and so they were on my radar, let's just say that. So when one drove by on the way out of the neighborhood, I noticed it. It's not a thing that I maybe would have noticed normally, but I noticed this car. So when it came back into the neighborhood, I immediately noticed it again. It pulled directly into the driveway. A man got out. He did not look creepy, scary, or suspicious in any way, shape, or form. So I wasn't nervous. And gets out of the car, comes directly over to me. He has a binder in his hands. He is wearing a button-down shirt. He's wearing jeans. He looks relatively clean cut. And he says that he was driving around. He saw me outside. He had some magazines or some pamphlets that he was giving out. And he asked if my parents were home. Now, I knew not to tell people that I was home alone. But you're in the moment. And, you just respond authentically. So I said, this is my friend's house. And he asked if her mom was home. And I said, no. He said, okay, well, I'll just leave these for you. This whole interchange, he's a good distance away from me. And so no red flags until he reached in to give me the pamphlets. And I felt the cold metal on my neck. And he said, come with me. I said, stop. And he said, why don't you come with me? And kind of, presses in a little bit. And I did. So from the outside perspective, the neighbors saw me getting into the car, and it just looked like he had his arm around my neck. You couldn't see anything. And I did. I walked around to the driver's side. He opened the door. He put the seat forward and said, get in. I looked in the back seat, and there was a plastic container, and he said, get in the container. And so I did. And I immediately knew that now I had to escape. I had to take the power. I've been taken from my friend's front yard by a man that I don't know. He's transported me to a secondary location via a container in the back seat of his car, and he has carried me into his apartment. If you know anything about crime, the likelihood of survival after being transported to a secondary location decreases significantly. So my life is quite likely in peril. Not something that I realized at the time. So my captor drags the container into his apartment, and he leaves me there for a minute.
and comes back, takes the lid off. I'm still restrained. I still have a ball gag in my mouth. And he tells me that he'll take it out, but I can't scream. I can't yell. And so I nod, okay, I'll do that. And he takes it out, and this begins 18 hours of hell. So I'm with my captor. The first thing that he does is he does like an interview with me. He asks me a lot of questions and writes down the answers. He has like a legal pad, and he's asking me what my full name is, what my address is, what my friend's name is, what my boyfriend's name is, what's his address. Lots of questions, and writing down all of the answers. He lays out a few rules. Most importantly, the rule is that there will be consequences and rewards, and it's based on my action, and that I should always remember that he will have a gun or a weapon at all times. So shortly after was the first time that an assault occurred, and happened multiple times while I was there. My memory functions a little like a snapshot. So I have several snapshots in time of when I was there, but I can't necessarily place them in time. So at one point, he, for instance, wanted me to eat. And I said I wasn't hungry. And he said, okay, well, you're going to be here for a few days. And so you have to eat while you're here. And I said, well, is there anything that I can do that would help you out? So this is the appease side of the fight, flight, or freeze and appease. I wanted to co-regulate his nervous system. And he said, yeah, you can sweep the floor. So this was one of the first times that I began fact gathering on my captor, because I never knew his name. And I knew that when I escaped, I was going to have some information to identify him. So this was the beginning of my investigative process. So I used that as an opportunity to get close to his refrigerator and memorize who his doctor and his dentist was from magnets on the refrigerator. The doctor had been gathering information about me, and what he did not realize is that I was also gathering information about him. So I knew his doctor, I knew his dentist, I knew the serial number that was on the inside of the container that he transported me in. I also, at one point, was in the bathroom, and I saw a hairbrush with long red hair. I saw feminine hygiene products, so now I knew that there was a woman that lived there that had long red hair. I also, at one point, was sitting on the couch with him and having a conversation, and I found out that he was in the Navy. So I was just locking all of this information into my brain because I knew I would survive. There was never a question if I would survive. I knew I would. I knew I would escape, and I knew I had to identify him. So that was kind of my way of fighting back while I was there. Now, while I was there were, numerous times that I was assaulted. But for the most part, the weirdest thing is that my captor wasn't mean to me, which is a weird thing to say, I know, but it's how he slipped through the radar for so many years, and which is exactly what he did. And the one time that I saw his resolve kind of break was when he put me back in the container to make a phone call, and I was hyperventilating. I was in a closed plastic container for at least 30 minutes. I had a gag in my mouth, and I was just sitting there going, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And so he came in, he heard me, and he said, well, why are you making so much noise? And I told him that I couldn't breathe. And he said, okay, well, I will take the gag out of your mouth if you promise not to make a sound. And I did. So he stuck to his rules, which were, there will be rewards and there will be punishments. That was something that was very clear that he did stick to while I was there. Some of the other things that happened, again, my memory works like snapshots. So there's photos, which is why it's a big part of the reason why it's not easy for me to talk about, but it is easy because there's not as much emotion attached to it. My processing was to shut down emotions. And so some of the other things that happened is he made me watch the news and see if anybody missed me. He also at one point told me that he was going to let me go when he was done with me, and it would be somewhere that I didn't know where I was, and it would be my choice if I went to law enforcement, and was always known as the girl who was. So a lot happened, And eventually, around 2 or 3 a.m., he restrained me for sleep with handcuffs tied to the bed and a leg restraint tied to the bed as well. I've told the story up to the point where I'm restrained for bed. I have been given Valium, and I always knew that when he was sleeping was when I would be able to escape. But unfortunately, I had drugs in my system, and I fell asleep around 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's the end of the story for
My girlfriend found out that I was taking one for the team when we first met, and now she's spiraling in insecurity. How do I get her to be confident in my attraction to her again? About 2 years ago, I was at a party with a friend of mine who we'll call Josh. Me and Josh were just vibing to the music and chilling when he suddenly spots 2 girls. The one he was interested in was this pretty blonde, while the other was her heavier friend. That's not to say her friend was unattractive, but just a little noticeably bigger than what could be considered average weight. Anyway, Josh turned to me and urged me to be his wingman by taking one for the team and distracting her friend while he chatted with the blonde. After a little back and forth, I decided to just do it and be a good friend. So we made our way over and made our move, where I would go in first and start chatting with their friend while Josh began flirting with the girl he was interested in. Again, this friend I was talking to was by no means unattractive, just a bit heavier than what most guys, myself included at the time, would go for. I thought she was very sweet, even though I was just talking to her out of obligation. It didn't really matter anyway, because ultimately the girl Josh was into already had a boyfriend apparently and had seemingly brushed him off, with him eventually patting me on the back to signify I didn't have to chat with her friend anymore. So I decided to politely end the conversation, however, not before she asked for my Instagram, which I decided to give her. I didn't really think much of it at the time, and I was certain I would never see her again. However, a couple of days later, I ran into the same girl in my school's campus store. I didn't really recognize her at first, but she seemed to know me immediately. We decided to chat for a bit, and I was reminded of her name, Megan. Anyway, it was really just small talk until Megan suddenly seemed a little awkward. I asked her if everything was alright, and she replied that nothing was wrong, but she wanted to know if I wanted to go out with her sometime. This actually came as a shock to me because it was the first time a girl had ever made the first move and asked me out. So even though she wasn't really my type at the time, I said yes. And that was probably the best decision of my life. Me and Megan really hit it off, and before long we were in a serious relationship. Any qualms I had about her weight were gone immediately after the first time we slept together, and I actually found her body to be really soft and comforting. I had never felt so relaxed cuddling with someone before I met her. We've been dating for 2 years now, and I absolutely love her. She's my everything, and I have even been thinking of proposing as soon as we are both done with school. Everything was perfect until last month. Last month, we hosted a small get-together just for a few friends who were also in relationships, like a couples game night sort of thing. It was here where Josh, who has been my good friend for years, was pretty drunk and made a joke about how if he had never forced me to take one for the team back then, I would never have found the love of my life. The joke didn't really register to me as anything negative, and I was also drunk, so I just laughed it off. Megan was cuddled up next to me on the couch, though, and asked what Josh meant by that. I told her nothing, but Josh, being the drunk idiot he was, elaborated and told her the story about how we met through my perspective at the time. Megan just said, "Oh," and didn't really react, so I figured she just brushed it off. However, the rest of the night she seemed kind of distant and even a little sad. Finally, once everyone had left, she let it all out and started crying. She was essentially in shock because this whole time she thought I approached her then was because I was interested in her, and learning that it was because I was forced to seemed to bring back old insecurity within her. It doesn't help that she's actually gained weight since back then, even though I don't really have any problem with that and have told her that multiple times. I immediately gave her the full story about how I fell for her right after that, and I have loved and adored her ever since. She seemed reassured, and we even cuddled the whole night after that. Since the night, though, she's been acting differently. It's like she's lost her confidence around me. She only wears large, baggy clothes, even though she never used to before. She refuses to change with me in the room and hardly eats in front of me. Before, I used to playfully tickle her stomach sometimes, and she'd always smile and play along. Now, she always seems insecure when I so much as accidentally graze it. She also refuses to sleep with me without a shirt on. So far, I sat her down multiple times and explained that her body is incredibly attractive to me and that there's no one more beautiful in my eyes than her. But it's like she doesn't believe me. Lately, I've been thinking about offering her to come to the gym with me, but I'm scared she may be more insecure at that suggestion. How do I get her to believe that I love her no matter what she looks like? That I truly adore her in all aspects? I just want her to be confident in herself again.
I saved my husband's life, but it ended up ruining our marriage. Story time. So my husband Steve and I have been married for 6 years. We have 3 beautiful kids. We are both each other's first partner as we've been together since we were in high school. Throughout our relationship, it's become more and more evident that Steve struggles with low self-esteem. And although I obviously experience this as well, it is nowhere near as intense as him. So 7 years ago, we decided that we were going to upgrade the technology in our house. We bought an iPad that he was going to use for gaming and I was going to use for reading. Since we logged in with his Apple ID, I was then able to read all of the messages that he was getting from his phone. However, he didn't know this and I ended up hiding it from him for all these years. I started using it to my advantage, to be honest, because whenever it was his birthday or Christmas, I'd go on and look through all of his messages and see if there was anything he'd spoken about with his friends that he might want. It earned me some solid wife points. It was like a little superpower. So one day close to Christmas, I ended up finding this conversation that seemed really, really suspicious. He had been talking with this person for months, and in the most recent text, they were trying to arrange a location for them to meet up. And obviously, my mind went to straight, it's a woman, he's having an affair, what am I going to do? He's cheating on me. So naturally, I continued reading. But the more and more I read, the more I realised he was actually talking about purchasing something from this person. And at first, I couldn't work out what it was that he was trying to buy. But then a few days later, I was reading again and it clicked that he was trying to buy an unregistered weapon. And it was really confusing to me because we live in such a safe, good area surrounded by families. So there was literally no reason for him to buy a weapon. Then shortly after this, we started to get letters and post come through that was for life insurance policies. And it was at this point that I realised what Steve was trying to do. And I obviously wanted to be there to support him, but I didn't want him to find out that I knew what his plan was. I more wanted to know why he planned to do this to himself. So I came to the conclusion that I would let the authorities deal with this. I kept an eye on the conversation, and when the day came that they decided that they were going to meet up in a car park, I rang the police. Steve and this dealer guy were both arrested. And that was when I got the call from the police and my world fell apart.
A man has just confessed to a murder for an almost 20-year-long missing persons case. Natalie Holloway was a straight-A student from Alabama who went on a senior trip to Aruba in late May 2005 with her classmates. They were ready to soak in the sun and celebrate their graduation with a bang. However, no one would expect this celebration to turn into a nightmare. On May 26, 2005, the group of 124 students and 7 adult chaperones check into the Holiday Inn Resort near the northern end of the island. The trip starts off great. A few days go by, and on the last day, Holloway meets a 17-year-old Dutch national named Jordan van der Sloot who lives nearby. They chat for a little and meet up later at the club downtown where they drink and dance together. Sometime after 1 a.m, Holloway is spotted leaving in a car with van der Sloot and his 2 friends, the Calpo brothers. The next morning, Holloway's friends are unable to locate her for departure. Her passport and bags remain untouched, and Holloway is nowhere to be found. Her family and friends are quickly alerted, and they fly into Aruba on a rented jet that same night. Van der Sloot is quickly questioned, and he states that he left the bar with Holloway and his friends, visiting a lighthouse before dropping her off at the hotel. He leads Holloway's friends and family to the hotel, promising to point out the security guard who allegedly helped her inside but isn't able to find the guard. Authorities quickly get involved and launch a group of 100 tourists and locals to comb the area, followed by volunteer teams, police, marines, and planes to search for Holloway over the next few days, but to no avail. It's as if she just vanished. Police make a few arrests, such as hotel guards, but end up releasing them. On June 9, 2005, the police chief arrests the 3 boys who were last spotted with Holloway, and the suspects now change their story. The Calpo brothers claim that they dropped Holloway off at the beach near the hotel, and van der Sloot insisted that he left her there to walk home. The Calpos are released shortly after, but van der Sloot remains detained for another 60 days with no explanation why. Over the next few months, all leads turn cold and van der Sloot and his friends are set free. Over the next year and a half, van der Sloot and the Calpos are questioned and legal action is taken against them, only to end in dismissals due to not having enough incriminating evidence. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and months turn into years. Over these years, van der Sloot becomes less tight-lipped and starts leaking information. In February 2008, in a broadcast of hidden camera footage set up by a Dutch reporter, van der Sloot tells an associate that Holloway collapsed on the beach and he was unable to revive her. He had a friend dispose of her body from a boat. He would later insist that he was fabricating the story. In March 2010, van der Sloot contacts Holloway's lawyer, John Q. Kelly, and offers to reveal the location of Holloway's body in exchange for $25,000 up front and $225,000 to come. Kelly agrees and relays the information to the FBI. Kelly takes $10,000 to meet with van der Sloot in Aruba, who states his father buried her in a house's foundation. Another $15,000 is wired to his bank in the Netherlands. Van der Sloot later admits to Kelly that he was lying again and secretly travels to Peru to take part in a poker tournament. No one was prepared for what was about to happen on May 30th, 2010. Van der Sloot kills a young 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez in his hotel room in Peru. Her body isn't immediately discovered because he had left instructions that forbade hotel staff from entering his room. He cuts and dyes his hair to escape, but is found in a taxi in Chile, where he is taken back to Lima and held in a high-security Castro prison. However, it would take many more years before everything comes to light. After almost 20 years, Jordan Vandersloot has finally confessed to the murder of Natalie Holloway. 5 years after Holloway's disappearance, Vandersloot is taken to a high-security prison for the murder of a young 21-year-old woman named Stephanie Flores Ramirez in Peru. A few weeks later, he's indicted to the U.S. for wire fraud and extortion for his attempt to acquire $250,000 from Holloway's mother. When asked why the suspect wasn't arrested after the wire payment and before he had a chance to kill Flores, authorities stated that there wasn't enough sufficient evidence to do so. In court, Vandersloot apologizes for killing Flores and states that he feels very bad. The defense blames it on extreme psychological trauma from years of dealing with the Holloway saga, but prosecutors state that he killed Flores to rob her of her winnings from a casino. On January 13, 2012, Vandersloot is sentenced to 28 years in prison in order to pay $75,000 in reparations to Flores' family. The Holloway family holds out hope for extradition to the U.S. to face additional punishment for the extortion charges, but learn that won't happen until his murder sentence is finished. 2 years later, in 2014, Vandersloot, 26, gets married in prison to his Peruvian girlfriend, Lady Figueroa, 24, who is 7 months pregnant. Earlier this year, in May, Peruvian officials allowed for a temporary surrender of Vandersloot to the U.S. to face charges of extortion and wire fraud for the 2010 indictment, where he pleads not guilty in June 2023. Finally, on October 18, 2023, Vandersloot confesses to killing Natalie Holloway in court. He enters a plea agreement and pleads guilty to the extortion and wire fraud charges while also confessing to the murder. He stated that Holloway and him were laying on the beach together kissing when he tried to escalate and she told him no. He ignores her and continues. Unable to get him off of her, Holloway kneed him in the crotch. He reacted by kicking her extremely hard in the face. This is when she went unconscious. He noticed a huge cinder block lying in the sand nearby and bludgeoned her face in with it. Afterwards, he dragged her lifeless body and disposed of it in the sea where he gets knee-deep in the water. This correlates as to why he was seen without shoes that night on his way home. However, despite this confession, he won't be prosecuted for the murder as the statute of limitations in Aruba is 12 years. The judge sentenced him to 20 years behind bars for the financial crimes, which he will serve concurrently with his Peruvian sentence. But if officials release him early, he'll have to serve the remainder of the 20 years in the U.S.
Am I the astronaut for taking back a shawl my wife made for a bride-to-be after she was uninvited from the wedding? Oof. My wife Lena crochets a lot and often gifts it to friends and family. When her second oldest brother got married, she made the bride a shawl to wear over her dress in the evening. The bride loved it, and ever since Lena has made shawls for everyone in her family getting married. Now Lena's oldest brother, George, is getting married again. Lena doesn't have a relationship with George as he was abusive to her as a child, but if she has to see him, then she is polite but distant with him. She doesn't want to cut off the rest of her family because of George. I work with George, and while we aren't friends, we're friendly at work. Lena encouraged this. When George got moved to my team, I was going to request a transfer, not wanting to expose Lena to George, as my team do a lot of get-togethers with our significant others. As it is a family wedding, Lena's mom asked her if she would crochet a shawl for George's fiance, and Lena agreed. It was arranged that once it was finished, I would take it to work to give to George so that Lena didn't have to see him. Earlier this week, the shawl was completed, and I emailed George at work to let him know that I would bring it in today as the wedding is tomorrow. When I got into work this morning, I gave George the shawl and let him know that Lena and I were looking forward to the wedding. Come lunchtime, Lena called me to let me know that George's fiance had called her and told her that she was no longer invited to the wedding, citing the place they are having the wedding and the reception at is too small for the number that they have coming, so they're having to make cutbacks. However, I was still invited to the wedding. I was mad at this because they clearly only invited Lena to get a shawl, which to me is just rude. If they had asked Lena outright to make one, she probably would have done it because she loves to crochet. On my way out of work, I noticed George wasn't at his desk, but the shawl was. I was still mad that they had used Lena to get a shawl, and I just shoved it in my work bag. I left a note on his desk telling George, since Lena was no longer invited, the shawl and I would no longer be attending either. On my way home, I told Lena what I had done and asked her if she wanted to go out instead, so as to not waste having a sitter. Lena was upset that I had taken the shawl, as it was causing an uproar in her family group chat where people were calling her petty because I took it back. Lena wants me to give it back. I don't think I should. They don't deserve Lena's kindness. However, at the same time, I don't want Lena to be upset with me over George and a shawl. Am I the astronaut for taking back the shawl? Edit, I have messaged the group chat letting them know that I took it, and if they should be pissed at anyone, it should be at me. But I would also do it again because no one gets to be a dick to Lena. I have absolutely no idea how to post an update in AITA, so I figured it was best to post it here in case anyone is interested. Everyone will be glad to know that I have not given George back the shawl. I mean, part of the reason I haven't given it back is because he's on his honeymoon. I hope It's rained for the past 2 weeks, but even if he hasn't, I still wouldn't give it back. Later that evening, Lena apologized for being mad at me. She said that she should have never agreed to make the shawl in the first place and was grateful that I had taken it back. Okay. So he knew his wife well enough to know that she wouldn't oppose this for long or in the long run. Lena and I had a long discussion about her family and how they treat her. I told her that I would always stand up for her when it comes to her family because I will stand strong when she can't. I asked her what she thought about going lower contact. We were already low contact with George, his now wife, and her mom. Lena said that she wanted to go no contact with George, his wife, her mom, and to go low contact with everyone else but her second oldest brother and his wife. We'll call them Michael and Sarah. She said she wanted to do this because of how toxic the group chat had become, which she has now left and has shown me that she has left and deleted the chat. We have both blocked everyone but Michael and Sarah. I'm going to wait a couple of weeks before I broach therapy for Lena again. I just want the dust to settle a bit as I don't want her to feel pushed into anything. The story the wife gave Lena about there not being enough space was bullshit. Michael confirmed that George had told him weeks ago that they were well under numbers for their venue. It was just a shit attempt at a power move. I know some Redditors were concerned about my work life after I took the shawl. I spoke with my manager and told him that Lena had made a shawl for George's wife, but they had given a shit reason for uninviting her to the wedding the day before the wedding, and I took it back. When I told my manager this, he sighed heavily before telling me that he wished I hadn't taken the shawl because George could make things difficult for me, but that he would have done exactly the same thing because George is a nightmare. I told him that I'd like to move to another team because it wasn't good for Lena to have to be around him. He told me to leave it with him and he would see what he could do. I'd have moved when George was first put on my team, but Lena encouraged me not to as she didn't want me to rock the boat with her family. I heard back on Monday that I will be getting moved to another team at the end of the week. Damn, I thought this manager was going to move George. I really did. The other team is desperate for someone, so when my manager reached out to other managers to see if anyone had an internal vacancy, this manager bit his arm off. That's an interesting expression. The day of the wedding, Michael called Lena and asked what our plans had been for the day. Michael knew that Lena wasn't invited to the wedding and rightly assumed I wouldn't go if she wasn't welcome. Lena told him that we had planned to go out for dinner and drinks. Michael told her that sounded like a plan and to text him where we were going for dinner. Michael and Sarah had decided to skip the wedding after seeing the meltdown of George, his wife, and their mom in the group chat. Apparently, the continued spouting abuse at Lena even though she had left the group chat. When the family turned on me and our children was when Michael and Sarah decided they weren't going to the wedding at all. They were just going to go to the ceremony after Lena had been uninvited. They messaged George to tell him their flight had been delayed and they wouldn't be able to make it. Their flight wasn't delayed, it was just the excuse they used, and George never responded. Michael had seen George's abuse of Lena firsthand, had tried to protect Lena where he could, but there was only so much he could do as a child himself, and didn't want to be on the receiving end of George's temper either. As an adult, he took the first chance he had to move away from his family while only maintaining contact with Lena. So, we went out with Michael and Sarah, having a much better night than we would have done at the wedding. There were no snide comments, no belittling, nothing. Lena was happy as she got to see Sarah, and that was what she was looking forward to. Lena being happy was all I wanted. It's all I ever want, my family to be happy. Both Michael and Sarah's phones did keep going off all night as mother-in-law and George kept messaging them, angry at their non-attendance, especially after Michael posted a picture of the four of us together having drinks on Facebook with a caption about how he was choosing Lena over George going forward because she doesn't use people to get what they want like George did over a crochet shawl. Michael admitted to me later that he did this to anger George because he'd have a meltdown at the reception and then his in-laws could see what an ass he actually is. Given the gleeful messages I got from Michael last week after he had heard back from a cousin who attended, George had a complete meltdown. Lena knows about this post, but she's not comfortable with me posting pictures of her work. She considered unraveling the shawl, but she found it difficult to undo all of her hard work, which I understand. It's the very reason I didn't unravel it myself and tell George it was an IKEA shawl. Well, that and I didn't want to face a mad Lena. After talking with Sarah about what to do with it, Lena has decided that she's going to keep it, but she will dye it. Michael suggested that she wear it to family Christmas. We aren't going to see Lena's family at Christmas, so it won't be happening anyway. Michael and I are at the same level of pettiness as I had previously suggested as some people comment on my original post that I could wear it to work when George is back. I didn't show Lena many of the comments. She doesn't need to see people calling her a doormat or saying she needs to grow a spine. These people clearly haven't had their spirit completely broken by the people who are meant to love them unconditionally or were completely cut out of family events. When George graduated from uni, Lena was left at home. She was 8 years old and left home alone all day. Christmas was spent mostly in her bedroom because her grandmother didn't want Lena around as her presence would just upset George. Until she was 14, then she would sneak out and spend it with me and my family. Lena was just left out of everything. Her dad used to work away from home a lot, so he had no idea what was going on. He just assumed Lena liked her own space. Not that she would just stay in her room because she was used to being neglected by her family.